All right, fam. Welcome to Melanated Truth. My name is John. This is another Torah talk. We are in Genesis chapter 11. Before we dive into Genesis chapter 11, a quick review, just so you see how the whole story gets put together. This that I have on the screen is our map of the Torah. And we said from the very beginning that there's some interesting things that are happening in Genesis that maybe you've never heard before. Like the very first word of Genesis is Bereshit, and it's missing the definite article. So instead of in the beginning, the very first word of Genesis is in beginning. So we asked the question, in the beginning, what? And we looked at a breakdown of the chapters of Genesis. And we see in the chapters of Genesis that it tells us a different story than the beginning of the world. In beginning is talking about in beginning a family, in the beginning of the story that the author is intending to tell. And the story is clearly about the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph. The first 11 chapters, which we're going to deal with chapter 11 today, but everything that we talked about is just the first 25% roughly of Genesis. And it covers creation and fall. There's talking snakes, and there's perfect, the world was perfect. And there's a talking snake, and then the spread of man and angels um, having sex with women, and then a flood, and then the table of nations, the re-spreading out, and then now the Tower of Babel. And all of that information is 25 chapters. And when you read the Apocrypha, it goes into much greater details about a lot of these things. So what we see in comparatively in Genesis is that these first 11 chapters are written as if they were bullet points. Let's get through these bullet points so we can finally slow down and have a conversation about what we're really talking about when we get to Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph. And realize that the reason this thing ends specifically with Joseph is because Joseph is the one that gets them into Egypt in the first place in the book of Exodus. The book of Exodus is used for the rest of the Bible as an archetype to talk about spiritual slavery and redemption, et cetera, and et cetera. So Exodus is one of the main pillars of the Old Testament. And in fact, when the children of Israel go into exile, the exile is seen as an anti-Exodus. So the Exodus is of paramount importance. The Exodus is of paramount importance in the scriptures. So Genesis is setting us up to see exactly how we got to the Exodus in the first place, into Egypt and then out of Egypt. So Genesis is all about who is this family, what are they called to do, and why are they necessary? How did we get here? Right? That's what the whole book of Genesis is about. Not about the beginning of the world. The book of Genesis is not about the beginning of the world. The book of Genesis is about the beginning of a family. So, how does the Tower of Babel? Oh, a couple of things. So, you see these highlights right here. It can be summed up into three things. Maybe if you've grown up in the church, you've heard about the fall of man. Even if you haven't, you probably heard about the fall of man, which there's Adam and Eve in a garden. A snake tempts the woman. They eat the fruit. They find out that they're naked. They get kicked out of the garden, which we've talked extensively about a lot of the layers that are going on in that story back in our Genesis 1, 2, and 3 conversations. But in actuality, in the Bible, there are three falls that perpetuate the need for Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and the story that God's going to tell for the rest of the Bible. There's three falls, and you can articulate it like this, and you see it very clearly in Scripture. There's the fall of man. Genesis 3, it says that the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and she took. The woman saw that the tree was good and she took. And then Genesis 6, we see a mirroring of that exact same language. The sons of God, now instead of humans, we're talking about these angelic figure, the sons of God, B'nai Elohim, saw that the daughters of men were attractive. We said that this word for attractive in the Bible is the same word tov, which is the word good. So the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were good and they took. The angels did the exact same thing that the women did, right? Or that humanity did, first starting with Eve, but equally with Adam. So man sins by eating from the tree, um, uh, taking what doesn't belong to it. These angels, they fall, and the rest of the Bible sprinkles in this information about these fallen angels. They leave their divine estate, and they come down, they take these women that look good to them, and they perpetuate what's called the Nephilim. And stuff gets so ugly and so bad because of what these fallen ones have done, that the Most High floods the earth. That's the second fall, the fall of man, the fall of many of these angelic beings, and the world that it creates. And then there's one final fall that perpetuates the need for this Abrahamic line that we're going to see, Genesis 12 through 50. And it's Genesis 11. We'll look at it in a second, but it mirrors the same language very similarly. They say, "Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower." So they want to. So how do they sin? They sin by way of wanting to build a city and a tower with its top to the heavens, and let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be dispersed. So we're going to talk about this a little bit more clearly, but this is the third fall. There's the fall of humanity and the curses that it unleashes on the world and on the serpent. There's the fall of the watchers and the sin that they perpetuate by whole means of things. We've talked extensively about that, about the book of Enoch and how that interacts with Genesis 6. And now there's Genesis 11. And when you put the apocryphal information of Jubilees and Jasher and mixed into Genesis chapter 11, what we see is that this rebellion that happens in Genesis 11 is a combination of a rebellion, of a human rebellion and a divine rebellion in partnership. And in partnership, these two, you could say Genesis 3 plus Genesis 6 equals Genesis 11. This human rebellion mixes it with this angelic rebellion for the purpose of doing several things that we'll get to in just a moment. But these three falls are what perpetuates the need for Abraham. And you'll see that very blatantly in the text when we get to Genesis chapter 12, the very next chapter. But I call this the playbook of the beast system. You know, it says that Hasatan, or actually, I'm sorry, it says Nahash, the serpent, was more crafty than every other beast of the field in Genesis chapter 3. And then we see in Genesis chapter 6 that these hybrids are made and they're called Nephilim, and they were called the Geborim, these mighty ones of old. And there are these hybrids. There are these hybrids. By the time we get to the New Testament, when we get the term demons, almost exclusively in Greek is called basically unclean spirits or bastard spirits. And in the intertestamental period, the tradition is that these bastard spirits are the disembodied souls or spirits of these Nephilim. That's where demons actually come from. Anyway, so Genesis chapter 11 is the marriage of these two things. These two fallen forces are coming together to try to accomplish something against the will of God, and this is where God does some very important things that then lead us to Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and the Bible story can finally begin. The Bible story really begins in Genesis chapter 12. Genesis chapters 1 through 11 is prologue. It's helping us know background information that most of the Israelites probably would have heard of, probably would have known. In antiquity, the stories would have been very familiar to them. So he chops these things up into bullet points, which is why Genesis 3 gets a whole chapter, but Genesis 6, the fall of the fallen angels, it's like 6 or 7 verses. And what we see here, the Tower of Babel, is like 6 or 7 verses. Isn't that interesting? It functions like bullet points. Then we can actually slow down and get into the story of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Why? Because Genesis is not about the beginning of the world. Genesis is about the beginning of a family, and a family that has a very specific role in the history and redemption of the world. Okay, so let's get to it. So that's the playbook of the beast system. Oh, one last set of information for you to see the patterns of how the Bible is highly structured. Nothing is happening haphazardly. In Genesis 5, we're talking about tracing a lineage. Genesis 3, um, the Most High curses the serpent and curses the ground. And one of the things that he says to the serpent is, "You're going to be cursed from now on. You're going to crawl on your belly. There's going to be enmity between you and the seed of the woman." And this is what's called by theologians the proto-evangelion, right? And he says it's the first time that we get the gospel message. And what he says is there's going to be enmity between the seed of the serpent and the seed of the woman. The seed of the serpent's going to bite the heel of the woman, but the seed of the woman is going to crush his head, period. It's this proclamation that the seed of the woman will succeed over the seed of the serpent. So now we're tracing that line. That's one of the main motivations of the book of Genesis, is that we're going to trace the line of the seed of the woman, specifically the chosen line amongst the seed of the woman, so that we can get to ultimately Yahusha, who is that offspring according to Galatians 3. He is the seed in which the scriptures is talking about. Okay, so Genesis chapter 5, let's look at the patterns here. Genesis chapter 5, you get a genealogy, and the genealogy is from Adam to Noah. In between there, and about 7 down from Adam, is Enoch. And we talked extensively about him during our Nephilim fallen angels conversation. But 10 down from Adam is Noah. Noah means rest. There's this great reset that happens. God floods the earth. Noah and his 3 sons and their wives get on the ark. They get taken. They land on Mount Ararat, and then God recommissions them to restart the earth. Right. So that's 10 down. It's 10 generations, and 10 has a really specific significance um, in Hebrew life. You know, the number 10 means completion, but it's like earthly grounded completion. In other words, it's completion that has manifested into the physical realm, right? So 7 down from Adam is Enoch, and in Enoch, uh, the judgment of the watchers goes out, right? And Enoch tells the watchers, according to, I think it's Enoch chapter 11 or so, he tells the watchers, like, yeah, you guys are done for. There's no mercy for you. The Most High has wrath for you because of what you have done and what you've unleashed on the world. And then by Noah, we see the flood happen, and then this reset with Noah happened. The final, the completion of said judgment has manifested in the life of Noah, and now the cultural mandate can go forward. Hopefully that makes sense. Now in Genesis 11, what we're going to see is we're going to see another 10 generations. So we're tracing the line of Shem. Do you see how clearly the Bible is intending to trace a specific line? And if you don't understand what the motivation of the book of Genesis is, you won't understand why there's so this guy beget this guy beget this guy beget this guy. It sounds like a whole bunch of nonsense that's haphazardly put in there. But if you realize Genesis is not about the beginning of the world, Genesis is about the beginning of a people, then you can understand, oh, we're tracing a line from Abraham to Noah, 10 generations. And when Noah comes off of the ark, some stuff happens, which we've already talked about. Go back and listen to it if you'd like. But he blesses Shem. Now, Shem is going to be the one that carries said blessed line and keeps taking it forward. So now in Genesis 11, we're going to follow the line of Shem. And Shem's going to come down to a man named Terah. And Terah, just like Noah, has 3 sons. And who is the blessed son? It's Abram, who eventually becomes Abraham. So Shem, Abraham, Adam to Noah. There's a reset. You got Shem. Shem is the blessed line. Shem to Terah is 10 generations, and you've got this reset that happens because of what we're about to look at. And Abraham is the chosen one amongst that line, and from Abraham come Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, and etc. Highly structured, highly intentional. This is why the genealogies are here. So now let's actually look at Genesis. Let's actually look at Genesis chapter 11. Now, the whole earth had one language and the same words. And as people migrated from the east, they found a plain in the land of Shinar and settled there. And they said to one another, come, let us make bricks and burn them thoroughly. And they had brick for stone and bitumen for mortar. Then they said, come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower with its tops in the heavens, and let us make a name. Let us make a name. Let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be dispersed over the face of the whole earth. And Yahuwah came down to the city and the tower, which the children of men had built. And Yahuwah said, behold, they are one people, and they all have one language, and this is only the beginning of what they will do. and nothing that they purpose to do will now be impossible for them. Come, let us go down and there confuse their language, so they so that they may not understand one another's speech. So Yahuwah dispersed them from there over the face of all the earth, and they left and they left off building the city. Therefore, its name was called Babel, because there Yahuwah confused the language of all the earth. And from there, the Lord dispersed, or Yahuwah dispersed them over the face of all the earth. Let's just stop there for a second. We'll tackle the rest of it in a little bit, but let's just stop there for a second and let's look at a few pieces of the puzzle. First of all, at the end of verse 32, at the end of chapter 10, it says that these are the clans of Noah, clans of the sons of Noah, according to their genealogies, according to their nations. And from these nations spread abroad on the earth after the flood. And we're told that these peoples, Shem, Ham, and Japheth's peoples, are separated by their clans, their languages, and their lands and their nations. Isn't that interesting? They're separated by their clans and their languages and their lands. But then we come to Genesis chapter 11, and we see that the whole earth had one language and the same words. How do you handle these things? Well, what we're doing is what's happened is we've jumped ahead in time. So now there's been this reset from Noah and the flood, right? And the people start to disperse, and everybody has their own languages, their own clans, their own groups, their own nation states, and now humanity is spreading abroad. And the Bible in Genesis chapter 10 wants us to be able to trace these families, 70 in total, which is a really significant number, especially when we get forward to the New Testament and Paul's missionary journey and things. Now we come to Genesis chapter 11, and what we're told is now the whole earth had one language. How does this happen? Now, what we're being given here, just like we talked about here, what we're being given here is the playbook of the beast system. This is a part of the motif, and the author now expects you to pick up what he's putting down so that you can know what's happening going forward. And what we have is the kind of unity that is a forced unity. You've got a people now that have come together, and you see this pictured out more clearly when you read the book of Jubilees. You can start in about chapter 9 or 10. But when you read the book of Jubilees, what you see is that this guy, Nimrod, which Genesis 10 talks about, he becomes this Gabarim. He's this mighty man, and he unifies the nations. And he basically becomes somewhat of the king of the world. We'll get to more of that when Genesis 14 comes around with a man named Amraphel. Anyway, we'll get there when we get there. But this guy Nimrod has unified the world. Now he's created, you might call it a melting pot. Where have you heard melting pot before? Where all these different nations and tongues come together to build this society. And this society is supposed to be this utopic kind of society. They got one language and the same words. It's a unity that comes with the beast system, and beast system unity is not good. This is the first hints that we get of that in Genesis chapter 11. The whole earth had one language and the same words, and the people migrated from the east. So now think about, if you're coming from the east, if you're going east, that means you come from the west. That means you're going west. So if you've come from the east, just think about geographically where that might be. We'll get there in just a minute. And as people migrated from the east, they found a plain in the land of Shinar and settled there. And they said to one another, "Come, let us make bricks and burn them thoroughly." And they had bricks for stone and bitumen for mortar. Where else do we see in the Bible people building with bricks? Why would that have been interesting or important to an Israelite audience? That there's this unity in the earth, and in that unity, these people come together to build with bricks. This is exactly what is said of the Israelites in the book of Exodus when it's talking about their slavery, that they had to build the cities with these bricks. And when Moses comes in and starts making a mess of things, they take away the straw so as to make their efforts more difficult. Now, what's happening in the story is the author wants us to see that that what was happening in the Tower of Babel is the precursor to what happened to them in Egypt. Meaning, imagine that the recipients of the book of Genesis are people that have just come out of the slavery that is in Egypt. And there's two different arguments. Let me just give you this really quickly. When people think about the book of Genesis, they generally think it's one of two things, and I think it's a combination of both. I'll tell you what. Um, they think that the book of Genesis is likely either written as they come out of the Exodus and they're wandering in the wilderness. They begin to codify these things and experiences. The Most High starts to speak through Moses. And there's another camp that believes that this is actually after, or this is happening during the exile, that the book of Genesis is being uh, uh, codified during the exile in Babylon, and they're showing them all these patterns. Either way, what you need to see though is that there's this false unity that's being built between this kingdom that builds these things up, and it's causing the people that are in said kingdom to build with bricks, not unlike they were forced to do in Egypt. This is the point of this little phrase here. Come, let us build bricks and burn them thoroughly. The point of this little phrase is that the Israelites would see in their mind the same thing that just happened to them in Egypt. So is that good or bad? Is that good or bad unity? Egypt was unified. Is that good or bad unity for the Israelite? It's bad unity. Let's see if this theory holds water. Verse 4. Then they said, "Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower with its tops in the heavens, and let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be dispersed over the face of the earth." Okay, so what's the motivation for building the tower according to Genesis chapter 11? The motivation of building the tower is for them to make a name for themselves. The motivation for the tower and the city is for them to make a name for themselves. So everything that they're doing, all of this false unity, all of this slave labor with the building with bricks, all of this is so that they would make this big gaudy city. Now think about what the Bible has said about cities thus far in the Bible up to Genesis chapter 11. The only other city that has been talked about is the city of Cain. Actually, that's not true. The city of Cain, though, is the first city that's mentioned in the Bible. They go from this garden oasis. Now they're kicked out of the Garden of Eden. They're still in Eden. Cain murders his brother, and then he's marked and he's sent out of Eden. So now he's kicked even further out of the presence of God or the concentrated will of God. God willed for Adam and Eve to live in an Edenic utopia, but what actually happens is first they get kicked out of the garden. They're still in Eden. Now Cain kills his brother, and he's kicked out of Eden. He's continued. He's forced to go even further east, right? And what it says about Cain is that Cain builds a city for his son and names it after him. So now the city building up to Genesis chapter 11, city building in the Bible is an act of rebellion up to Genesis 11. Now, not all cities are wicked or evil, but understand what the Bible is trying to say and what the Bible is trying to perpetuate. The first city built in the Bible was built by a murderer named Cain, and he names it after his son. And then in Genesis chapter 10, we follow a man named Nimrod, and we see of Nimrod that the beginning of his kingdom was Babel and Akkad and Chalna and Assyria and Nineveh. And it's these great cities, quote unquote, right? So all of these cities are started by a dude named Nimrod, not a good guy and not good cities. So everything that we've heard about cities so far is bad and negative. And what is their motivation? They want to build a city and they want to build a tower so that they can make a name for themselves over the face of the whole earth. So verse 5, we'll come back to this name thing in a second. And Yahuwah came down to see the city and the tower which the children of men had built. And Yahuwah said, "Behold, the people are one, and they have one language, and this is only the beginning of what they will do. and nothing that they purpose to do will be impossible for them. Come, let us go down. Highlight that. I meant to do that earlier. Come, let us go down, and there confuse their language so that they may not understand one another's speech. So Yahuwah dispersed them over the face of the whole earth, and they left off building the city. Therefore, its name was called Babel. Okay. So what's happening is the Most High just hating? Like, what's wrong with unity? What's wrong with building a city? What's wrong with building a tower? Why would he do this? Why would he see their unity and see that nothing's impossible for them now if they were to um keep doing this? Why would they do that? Or why would the Most High disperse them? Is he just hating? Well, there's a couple of things that are happening here. First of all, understand that the Most High is not threatened by their work. They intend to build a tower, and if you read the Apocrypha again, you see it from two vantage points. What we're looking at here in the Genesis 11 account is the vantage point from on the ground, meaning what was the human motivation, and that's what we're going to deal with extensively. But in the Book of Jubilees, what we see is the angelic motivation. The reason these spirits are stirring up these people to build this particular tower is so that they could build a tower to crack the rakia or the expanse or the canopy, whatever you say, to make war in heaven. That's one of the motivations. The other motivation for the fallen and angelic beings, one is to make war in heaven. The other is so that they could set up their idols there and be worshipped and praised. So no good motivations, right? But understand that the Most High is not threatened. How do we know that? It says they're building a tower to try to get to heaven, right? And it says that the Lord came down to see the city. Tower doesn't reach him. Verse 7, he sees what's going on. It's as if the language is as if the Tower of Babel is so beneath the Most High that he's got to come down to actually be able to squint to see it. Then verse 7, come, let us go down there and confuse their language. So after having come down to see it, now he's got to go down all over again to actually do something about it. This thing is so beneath him. He's not threatened by the Tower of Babel. As impressive as it might have looked to people and as important as it might have been to the fallen ones to build this thing, it's not impressive to him. And it's so not impressive that he's got to go down twice in order to touch it and do something about it, right? So now why would so if he's not threatened, why would he do this? It's because, as it says, nothing will be impossible for them. You could ask the same question about the Garden of Eden. After Adam and Eve eat the fruit of the knowledge of tree of the after Adam and Eve eat the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, they're marred now by sin. And if they eat the tree of life, then they have eternal life in this damned state, which they're not actually damned. So they have eternal life in this broken and fallen state. So he kicks them out of the garden. Why? Because if they eat from the tree of life, that is who they are and what they will be forever. In the same way, what this false unity has been built around this beast kingdom, now nothing's impossible for them. So he disperses them. Why? Because the fallen ones intend to make war in heaven. And if they keep on building, they're going to get exactly what they want. They're going to get war. And it's not going to go well for humanity. If they get what they're really building towards, it's not going to go well for humanity. So he confuses their language and he disperses them. Verse 9, therefore its name is called Babel, because there Yahuwah confused the language of all the earth. Now, it's important to know that Babylon was called the gateway to the gods, and these ziggurats that they would build, these huge tower structures they would build. It was this whole ritual that happens across a lot of pagan cultures because all religion actually comes from Genesis 11. All religion comes from the Tower of Babel. That's a whole nother conversation. But that's why you see pyramids and structures all over the world. It's these ziggurats that they saw as a means to entice, quote unquote, the gods. They were called the gateway to the gods. But now the Bible puts its own spin on it, and it says, no, 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 no. Babylon is not the gateway to the gods. Babylon is the means towards confusion. It's the place of confusion. It's where God confuses the humanity and resets them once again. This is the Tower of Babel. Now, why is that important to know? That's important to know. Well, we'll get to it in just a second. Now let's look what happens here next. Remember, the motivation, at least the human motivation that we're told here, is that they want to build a city and a tower into the heavens and make a name for themselves, right? God says no, shuts it down, disperses them. Genesis 11 verse 10. These are the generations of Shem. So right after those 9 verses talking about the Tower of Babel, now we go into a genealogy. That's so weird. What a waste of space. Why would the Bible do that? Don't you want to know more details about what was going on, why it was happening, how he actually did it, what would it look like, what it smell like, what it feel like? Bible doesn't give you any of that information. It gives you 9 verses really briefly about what happens, and then it goes into a really long genealogy. These are the generations of Shem. Shem begot Arphaxad, Shelah, Eber, so on and so forth. And then we're going to get down to Terah. So the first 9 verses of the chapter is about the Tower of Babel, a pretty significant event. Verses 10 through 26, the next 16 verses is just a genealogy. And then verses 27 through the end of the chapter, verse 32, is just another portion of said genealogy. The rest of it is a genealogy. Is the Bible just wasteful? Are these people just bad storytellers? Is that what we think? Or is there something else going on here? And the truth is, there's something else going on. So what is it? Well, it comes in the form of this name Shem. Remember, Noah had 3 sons, and their names were Shem and Ham and Japheth. Now, because of the things that happened with Canaan, Noah curses Canaan, and he begins to divvy out these words, these prophetic words to his sons. One of those prophetic words is a blessing, and he gives a blessing to Shem. And to Shem, he basically says, the rulership, the line is going to come through you. Well, what does the word Shem actually mean? Now we see in the scriptures that these names are highly anticipatory um, or explanatory, right? Therefore it's called Babel because because the Lord confused their language. Babel means confusion, right? So Shem means name. Let's see if I can get that to pull that up. It means name or standing or reputation or fame. Isn't that interesting? So what was the motivation of building this Tower of Rebellion? These people wanted to build a name, make a name for themselves, contrary to the Most High. So what does the Most High do? He disperses them, and now we're going into the generations of a dude named Name or reputation or fame. What's being said here? The want of reputation, the want of popularity, a name, whatever, those things are not evil in and of themselves, but the dogged pursuit of this idea of name and reputation apart from the Most High is sin. So what does he do? It's the definition of sin. It's the foundations of a beast kingdom and a beast society, which the Bible is going to play out for the rest of the Bible. It's going to accentuate itself in the book of Revelation with the beasts out of the sea and all those kinds of things. So, and just to summarize, they want to make a name for themselves. God says no. But it's not the name that's the problem. It's the heart motivation to be contrary to what the Most High has called them to. Remember, at the end of the Noah story, he says, be fruitful, multiply, spread out, fill the earth. That's his will. It's the same thing that he says to Adam and Eve from the very beginning, before the rebellion has spread out, make the rest of the world look like an Edenic paradise, like this little garden in Eden does make the rest of the world look like that. They don't do it, they fall. God resets the thing when he resets it after the flood. Then you've got Noah, and he gives Noah that same command. Why? Because that's what's on God's heart. He wants to spread this thing. He says, don't just collect and build up. He says, spread out and turn the rest of the earth into the Edenic thing that I intended from the beginning, that I modeled from the beginning. It's a part. He desires a partnership with man to spread his fame and glory. That's where our name and reputation come from. So in the Tower of Babel, you've got this contrary thing that's happening, this rebellion in which they say, no, we're not going to spread out. We're not going to do what you ask. Instead, we're gonna dig our heels in right here. We're gonna all lock arms, come together, and we're gonna, in a unified way, rebel against the Most High. And we're gonna build this tower, and we're gonna build this city, and that's what's gonna be our boast. And the Most High says, nope, that's not gonna happen. So now, as we chase the line of Shem, we're going to see how it is that God's going to make his fame um, spread across the earth, his name and his reputation, and how it is the appropriate way for us to find name and reputation. It's in relationship with him, it's in partnership with him, and it's doing what he's called us to do, namely to spread out and to go. So we said that 10 down from Shem is a man named Terah, and Terah's name essentially means a wanderer, right? And from Terah, we get Abraham. Let's look at verse 27. Now, these are the generations of Terah. Terah fathered Abraham, Nohar, and Haran. And Haran fathered Lot. So we're going to come back to Lot for the Bible readers. So Haran fathered Lot. Haran died in the presence of his father Terah in the land of his kindred in Ur of the Chaldeans. Wait. Now, if you've grown up reading the Bible or grown up going to church, likely there's a lot of images in your head about what Adam and Eve would have looked like, even though it's literally said that they're made of dirt and water, which is mud. So they're made of mud and they're in the land of Cush, which means black. We've got some other image of what Adam and Eve would have looked like. Wonder where that came from, right? Same thing with Goliath, who was a Philistine. We've got a particular image of what we think that Goliath might have looked like, even though Goliath was a Philistine, and the Philistines came from Mitzrayim, which is Egypt, and and the Egyptians were sons of Ham, which were the progenitor of black people, according to the Zondervan Dictionary. We've gone over that several times. The black people except the Negroes. So here's what's interesting. In verse 28, Haran dies in the presence of his father Terah in the land of his kindred. This could mean basically family. This could be cousins in them, right? In Ur of the Chaldeans. Now, Chaldeans, where do we see the Chaldeans? Nimrod's territory. Cush fathered Nimrod. The beginning of his kingdom was Babel, Erech, Chalna. Huh. Assyria and built Nineveh, this place, Kala, Ressas, et cetera, et cetera. But this is, again, Hamitic territory that we're talking about. Why is it saying that Abraham's brother, his kindred, were in the land of Ham? And what does that mean about the mixing of the lineage of Shem and Ham? And this is what you're going to see over and over and over again through the Bible, that Shem and Ham had a very, at time, well, let me say it this way. I'm not saying they had a close relationship, because a lot of times Hamites were oppressing the Shemites, but they had this relationship where they were mixing all the time. So does it make sense that Ham would be black and that Shem would be white? And if it does, then you got to make that make sense for your own self. I know what makes sense to me. If you want to do hoops, if you want to jump hoops and make that mean something else, then you've got to do that. But this is what the biblical data says. Haran dies in the presence of his father in the land of his kindred in Ur of the Chaldeans. And Abram and Nahor took wives. Where did they take wives? In the land of the Chaldeans. Okay, so now Abraham's kindred and wife comes from this place. The name of Abraham's wife was Sarai, and the name of Nahor's wife was Milcah, the daughter of Haran, the father of Milcah and Ishka. And now Sarai was barren; she had no children. Terah took Abram his son and Lot, the son of Haran, his grandson, and Sarai, his daughter-in-law, with I'm sorry, his son Abram's wife, and they went together from Ur of the Chaldeans to go into the land of Canaan. Remember, Canaan is a Hamite, so now they're leaving Cushite territory, a son of Ham, and they're going to more Hamitic territory, specifically the land of Canaan. But when they I'm sorry, specifically the land of Canaan. But when they came to Haran, they settled there. So now they settled in Haran's land, which is Haran died in the presence of his fathers in the land of his kindred and Ur of the Chaldeans. Chaldeans are Hamites. Now they go to the land of they were going to the land, they were going into the land of Canaan, but when they came to Haran, they settled there. So when we pick up Abraham's story, he is thoroughly in Hamitic territory. Cush means black. Mitzrayim, they didn't call themselves Mitzrayim. The Egyptians, they didn't call themselves Egyptians. They didn't call themselves Mitzrayim. They called themselves Kemet, which means black. Cush means black or Ethiopian. Ham means burnt. You tell me what they look like and what this whole thing is about. But when we first are introduced to Abraham, he was planning to go to Canaan, which also is, remember, Hamitic territory. But they end up in Haran, which we're told is in the land of Chaldea, and they settle there. The story probably looks in your mind very different than what the text seems to present, because the text seems to present a story that's filled with melanated people. Everybody in the story so far is deeply melanated, different shades of melanation, but deeply melanated. These are people that are made out of mud and they're in Hamitic territory. And when God is calling the line of Shem out, and through the line of Shem, we get to Terah, and from Terah, we get to Abraham, and Abraham is in this Hamitic territory, in this Cushite, Hamite land. And that's where the story of the Bible really begins. Now we're going to get to Genesis chapter 12. And from Genesis chapter 12, he's going to call them out of that land and call them to be a great nation in this land of Canaan. We'll get there next time, but I want us to see very clearly what the Bible is saying. Maybe you're told in your Sunday school or in your gathering that these things are just too impossible to understand or too impossible to trace down. Or maybe you've got, microwave hot pocket faith, and it's like, well, if you can't give it to me in bullet points, if you can't summarize it to me or give it to me in a cartoon, I'm not going to spend my time studying it. But when you slow down just a little bit and you look at what the text says, this is what the scripture is laying bare. That the story of Abraham starts in the land of the blacks, and he takes a wife from the land of the blacks, and eventually we're going to see that he himself is a black man. But we'll get there eventually. Thank you for joining us. My name's John. I'm grateful that you would spend time with us. The big summary of what we're talking about today is that there's this rebellion that happens in the land of Shinar called the Tower of Babel. And the Tower of Babel is used as an archetype for the beast kingdom going forward. So when God destroys the beast kingdom, he's going to call a line, a remnant of people from the said line, and that's going to be the people that he uses to restore and redeem the world. This is why Genesis 1 through 11 is important. Genesis 1 through 11 is important because it's answering a simple question. How did things get so messed up, and what part do we, the Israelites, play in it? That's the question that the Bible is answering, and that's why the Bible writes the things the way it writes in Genesis 1 through 11. So we'll see you next time. In Genesis 12, we'll pick up from there, and we'll look at the calling of Abraham and what happens going forward. Thank you if you made it all the way to the end of our conversation. Thanks for joining us. Please like, comment, subscribe, share, all those things. I'll also leave my Cash App in the description if you want to contribute to our ministry. We would love that. And as always, Romans 15, 13, may the God of hope fill you with joy in believing, so that you may abound in hope by the power of the Holy Spirit. Hallelujah. May the Most High bless you and keep you. See you guys later.